Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Montana Book Festival event in celebration of FootHills Publishing's, I'm going to say that again, FootHills Publishing's Montana Poet Series number 4. My name is Lauren Korn. I am the director of the Montana Book Festival. Before diving into the logistics of this event today, I'd like to thank our event sponsors, Arts Missoula, the Whitefish Review, and Burn Street Bistro. Thank you all for making this event possible, and thank you, audience, for being here. So now the logistics, the housekeeping. We'd like to welcome you as attendees to submit any questions you have to our poets of honor today via the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. Our event moderator and editor of the Montana Poet Series, Mark Gibbons, will be addressing your questions towards the end of the reading. And feel free to throw comments in the chat, but do relegate your questions for our poets to the Q&A rather, so we know to get to them. On the back end of things, Kim, an MBF volunteer, will be monitoring the chat and answering any logistical questions you have about the event or about purchasing books, for instance. And with that, I'd like to welcome Mark Gibbons to the screen, Montana's newly anointed Poet Laureate and this series editor. And I'm gonna go ahead and throw Mark's bio into the chat so you guys can see everything that he's done. So Mark, if you wanna get on screen, wonderful. Welcome.
Thank you. Well, it's my honor to be hosting this fourth series of the FootHills Publishing Montana Poets Series. Just as a brief background on it, it started in 2010. Craig Chury, who had gone to school out here at the University of Montana and found a love of poetry, started this series when he wanted to give back to where he started with poetry, which was Montana. And he selected 6 poets, and then that was 2010, 2012, they did another series of 6 poets. I was lucky enough to be included in that second series. And then the third series was done in 2018. And then this being the fourth series in 2021. FootHills Publishing is the baby of Michael Zarnecki, poet from upstate New York, and his wife, Carolyn, who as a team have been putting out books of poetry for about 35 years. So they have a catalog. I can't even imagine how many titles are in it, but over 500, I'm sure, at this point. So these people joined that group, the FootHills Club, and also this Montana Poet Series. I guess that is my job to just try to do some intros here, and we want to keep this as brief as possible because we want to hear poems. So I'm going to just tell you a brief thing about our first reader. Our first reader is Chris Latreille, and I met Chris. He likes this story too, I know. I met Chris in an alley in front of the dumpster, and we agreed at that point that since we knew each other were both writers, we should probably get together over a beer and talk about it. And that kind of sealed the deal, I think. So from that point onward, I've been hanging out with Chris as often as possible. I like what Chris does on the page. He's very direct, and he has a rather cynical wit. He's an earthy poet. And I think you'll enjoy what you're going to hear today. So I am now just going to turn this thing over to Mr. Chris Latreille.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Montana Book Festival, for letting me participate in this particular reading. You know, books are kind of a funny thing. Here's mine. I think it's the most recent one to come out from this series. It's not a book I ever expected to be anything other than just a self-published, maybe little hand-bound 100-copy chapbook thing. But when Mark was putting together the series and asked if I had anything, that's what I had. And, you know, haiku is one of those kind of specialized things that not a lot of people write, I guess, or at least write when it comes to serious poetry, unless you're serious about haiku. And as I state kind of in my introduction, it's the type of thing that I learned when I started writing it in the wake of my first book, that, you know, if I only could do one kind of writing, that's probably the writing I would do, because I love it so much. For me, you know, a haiku is like a little short story, and in 3 lines. So to, you know, when I read through, I guess there's 100 haiku in this book, every one takes me to a specific time and a specific place or a specific person. And often when we write books, you know, it's one thing I don't understand, you know, if you write a book that takes a decade out of your life, and so much can change in a decade. This particular book for me, you know, was really only 2 or 3 years of like serious work on it. And it was kind of compiled and finalized during a month that I spent as a writer in residence in Crested Butte, Colorado. So it's very much a book-ended snapshot of a part of my life that has happened. Things have changed and are completely different. So, you know, a lot of the relationships and things that I thought would be part of my life while I was working on the book aren't. So it's difficult sometimes to read from it. And because, like I said, every little poem is a short story from a moment in my life. And I personally, I don't know how readable in a live environment haiku is, because I think it's an intimate transition between the writer and the reader is trying to find their own story in those 3 lines. So I don't really like to read from it. However, I will read one of the haibun. It's the one associated with fall. And what haibun is a mixture of poetry and prose kind of intermixed. And the haiku parts, the poetry, don't necessarily have to relate directly to the prose part. So I kind of like that push and pull of what the form kind of for a writer allows you to do. And this one is called Dog Paddling with Thoreau. And Thoreau being someone who I think, if he didn't know what haiku and the Chinese poets were doing at the time, he was certainly spiritually connected to them. And if I was to rewrite Walden in the way that people like rewrite the Bible and they change the words for relevancy with the time period in which it has been translated into, I would translate his famous quote, "The mass of people live lives of quiet desperation." And for those of us living those lives of quiet desperation, I would like to read for you this poem called Dog Paddling with Thoreau, this haibun, a visit to Walden Pond with swimming. The trees surrounding the pond are red and gold and green and every shade in between. Leafy reflections ripple across the surface of the water. I feel no less reverent for having visited before. In the year's final quarter, it remains New England hot and humid, and the beach is populated with swimmers. Who am I to resist? Face down, the naturalist writes our world. Freeze like a bear with one paw in the honeypot at the approach of a woman and 3 children who gather around a minivan not 10 feet from where I, naked from the waist down, am trying to squirm into a pair of swim trunks just purchased from the gift shop. The last experience I need is to spend a night in a Concord jail, not in protest, but out of indecency. I breathe a huge sigh of relief when they pull away, but only half so much as they should. A few more tugs and shimmies, and I am ready for the water, undaunted by the close call. It's not long, and I am treading water far out in the middle of the pond, turning slow circles to see its entire, oddly Texas-shaped boundaries. It isn't cold at all, which makes it hard to picture it being cut into chunks of refrigeration like Henry witnessed. Most other swimmers are far away, closer to shore, but a few of the more hardcore paddle past me, swimming with such confidence and grace as to make my untrained lungings and flailings look like the last moments of the imminent drown victim. Certainly, Henry never took swimming lessons, and I have to wonder, did he even swim at all? Does he describe stripping to his skivvies and taking the plunge on a hot day? Too long since I've read his American classic, beloved and loathed in equal measures by a legion of readers. It isn't his fault the point he was trying to make has been misconstrued by so many over the years, especially without him around to defend himself. I relish the opportunity to splash around in his pool. It helps me feel connected to him. I remain in the water long enough that my skin begins to pucker, then it's back to shore with me. Overquoted for 100 years and 50, time to hoe the beans. A saunter along the trail bordering the lapping water takes me past the original cabin site. I ponder the view from where a guest might sit at the front door awaiting the return of its architect. Then I'm off through the trees, past the train tracks, and all the way around. I stare into the face of the statue that strides away from the replica cabin, stony eyes intent on an open hand that wants for a book. What would this man and I have thought of each other? If the statue is life-size, he was tiny and ugly. I am hulking and ugly. We would make a perfect pair for a screwball comic strip, and that amuses me. Two lonely writers, somewhat surly, desperate in equal parts for both the want for and refusal of the company of others. The hilarity that could ensue. What did Henry know of the mountain poets? Everything. It is heavy dusk by the time I arrive back at my rental car. It is the only one remaining in the parking lot. A park ranger is standing in front of the vehicle, regarding my license plate, writing me a ticket, which she crumples up at my approach. I feel a twinge of guilt when she explains with irritation that all vehicles are supposed to be gone by sunset. I guess I got a little carried away, I say, and she says, I understand, but we want to go home. I'm sheepish, though the irony is not lost on me how rules have descended on Walden Pond, however understandable. However necessary, I guess. Disobedient, I strive to be civil. Miigwech, thank you for joining us, and I will kick it back to Mr. Gibbons. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. That was great. One of the things that I should say too also about this series, and what I like about the series in general, but this group of poets in particular, I guess, is the variety of the poets and their voices, and it's just a great tribute to what poetry is all about, the uniqueness of each particular voice. Our next poet is Kurt Sobolik, and Kurt is the one that I actually should blame for this whole thing happening. I guess Kurt and I have been sharing poems for probably 15 or so years, and I have been hounding him for a long time. When's the book? Where's the book? Where's the manuscript? And finally, I guess he felt browbeaten enough into, saying, just get me off his back. And he produced this great manuscript. And so having my connection with FootHills that I had, because I've been there for a while with those people, I decided to talk to them about this series. And as a result of thinking about not the series, but just helping Kurt get his book maybe into print, it hit me that I've got all these other people that I know right here. And I contacted FootHills, and they in turn said, well, why don't you do this series? Because you know all these people. And so that's how this series was born. So thank you, Kurt, for all of that. And thank you even more for what you're about to share with us, these particular poems that are unique in their own right. So I give you Kurt Sobolik.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it. Hope everyone's having a nice Friday. So these poems all come from my new FootHills book called Homespun, which I think you can probably see there, if any luck. And I'll just dive in. These are highly narrative, so I don't really think they need any setup. First one is called Bloodlines. I'm kneeling on the concrete underneath the catwalk, trying to connect the switch wires to the slide out motor in a travel trailer I'll never be able to afford, especially now with the child support and alimony payments but hydraulic fluid keeps dripping onto the wires, making them slippery, and I can't quite feel the connectors because the goddamn Band-Aid won't stay on my finger, and I'd had to wrap it in electrical tape to stop the bleeding. And I keep losing my grip on the wires and dropping the connectors while the dickheads up on the catwalk keep smacking my arms and the back of my head with their air hoses because they're behind and trying to finish attaching the hull in our station. And rather than risk losing my weekly production bonus by yanking their ignorant asses off the catwalk, I decide to stand up and take a deep breath before I try again. Only as I'm straightening up, I drive my head into the corner bracing of the catwalk and the blood starts streaming down my big bald melon like it's an ice cream cone melting in the sun. And as the trailer moves on to the next station, I'm left thinking about the safety bonus I was counting on to catch me up on my truck payments. And I just stand there in the dust and cast off bits of insulation and let it bleed. All right, second poem is called Deadlines. The message light on my phone is blinking as I'm talking to the IT guy who's been trying to integrate our archaic purchasing and production systems to lessen my workload. And he's telling me he has cancer and is on his way down to Mexico for some last-ditch miracle cure because neither the chemo nor the homeopathic remedies have worked. And I can't help thinking I'm really up to my ass in it and I don't have time for this. But of course, I do have time for this. So I listened to the guy tell me how much weight he's lost and the fact that he has 4 kids aged 10, 12, 17, and 22, and that he's been with the company 25 years. So he has some flex time accumulated. And I can hear the fear in his voice, and I'm truly sorry because I like the guy, and he's the only one in the entire company who's ever tried to make my job easier. But then I realized I only have 5 minutes left to finish my weekly production cuts so purchasing can order their materials on time. So I wish him well, and I dash out the cuts and hope I haven't made any mistakes because I haven't had time to proof them. And the next time I call California, I find out the IT guy has died and his replacement is telling me the funeral was the previous day. And I tell him how sorry I am and what a loss it is. But it's obvious the replacement doesn't know the systems well enough to help me. And I've got purchasing badgering me to transfer this week's cuts to their system, which I'll once again have to do manually. So I hang up the phone and I dive back in because I just don't have any time to spare. All right. This one is called Roadside Assistance. My tire goes flat, so I turn down a side street and pull over to the curb, but the lug nut is fused to the stud, so I have to call the tire shop for help. They send out a guy who fills the tire with enough air to get me to the shop where they hoist it up and get to work. I'm sitting in the waiting room, grimacing through the worst cup of coffee imaginable, half watching some morning show with the sound off, but the captions on, and half fretting about the stack of invoices waiting on my desk when my boss calls my cell and says, "Where the fuck are you, numbnuts?" And I say, "I got a flat tire." And he says, "Sure you do. You're probably hanging around the mini mart harassing that new counter girl you were telling me about." And I say, "No, really, I got a flat and I'm waiting for them to fix it." And he says, "Oh, bullshit." And I say, "What do you fucking want, a note from my mechanic?" And he says, "Yeah," and hangs up on me. So I walk out into the shop and I have the tire guy snap a photo of me standing in front of my car, flipping the bird with both hands. And I send it to my boss and he texts me back and and says, "Where's your safety glasses, dickweed?" And I text him back, probably next to my hearing protection. And he texts me back, "Yeah, you must have lost them the last time you had your head up your ass." And I laugh and resend him the photo of me flipping both birds and go back to sipping my now cold coffee and wondering if I could sneak in a visit to the mini mart on the way back to the plant. All right, I'll read just one more and then we'll turn it back over. This one is called Jerry's Kids. Dolores called in drunk, and one of the other volunteers handed her off to me because she is my sister-in-law. So there I am on the TV screen looking like I'm taking pledges for Jerry's Kids when I'm really just trying to calm Dolores down. She's had a tough go of it. Her cat Leroy died recently after a short bout with leukemia, and she hasn't had any place else to put all that love. Her coping mechanisms have never been great, and she's taken to drinking wine coolers as soon as the clock strikes noon. Normally, she's passed out in her chair by the final clue in Jeopardy, but for some reason, she'd gotten a second wind and wound herself up thinking about Jerry's Kids, which led to her missing Leroy. I didn't mind much. I wasn't getting many pledges anyway, just pretending like I was every time they turned the cameras on like they told us to. Besides, Dolores had been there for me when Sheila left, and I felt like I owed her. So I just talked to her quiet like while she sniffled. And in the end, I told her I'd pledge $10 in Leroy's name and have the host read it over the air, which seemed to cheer her up a bit. I told her we could go down to the pound on Tuesday to look for another kitty if she liked. And she said she'd think about it, but didn't know if she was quite ready yet. Then I asked her if she thought she'd be okay. And she said, "I'll be fine, honey. You better get back to those poor kids." She said she'd stay up to hear Leroy's name, but she was already nodding off as our call ended, so I doubted she'd be awake to hear it. The studio folks were kind enough to make me a tape of the announcement so Dolores can play it whenever she wants. I think she'll appreciate that. It was a slow night, what with the economy and all, but we did manage to raise $12,000 for Jerry's Kids. Sure is good to see folks still help out when they can. Thank you, and I'll turn it back over to Mark.
Oh, thank you, Kurt. That's great. I will, moving right along, leapfrogging into our next reader, taking a deep breath because after that, and then we move into the next one, Jillian Kessler's book is somewhat different. It's not quite as hilarious, I know, to begin with. But I first met Jillian probably about 8 years ago, I think it was. We did a workshop together, and I heard her poems there. And then since then, we've maintained a poetry exchange, and then I knew that she had this manuscript because she asked me to read it for her and give her some feedback on it. And so she was another person that was just a logical choice. She had this terrific manuscript that you'll understand exactly what it's all about very shortly when she starts reading these wonderful poems to you today. So I introduce now Jillian Kessler.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Jillian. This is my book, Ash in the Tree. This is my dog who's decided to become a part of this moment. And he was actually a very pivotal player in this book coming to life because much of the book was written while walking him in the open space here in Missoula. And it happened. My mom had a stroke suddenly and she died about a week later. And when she was dying, my sister said to me, "You better be writing this down." So I started using my trusty cell phone and writing things down. And somehow it came into being in this book. So I have so much gratitude to Mark and the Montana Book Festival and FootHills Publishing for supporting me and this story. So here we go. The first one I'm going to read today is called When Mama Took the Amtrak All by Herself. Remember when you were young enough to take the train all alone from downtown LA to Whitefish, Montana, in the middle of nowhere mountains, towering pines, and a little station, days of Pacific Northwest greens, the seldom seen rivers of California, of Oregon. How did you maneuver with your cane down the rickety corridors, the chug and pulse of such movement, the distances, asking brazen questions of the men in uniform, their jaunty hats and polite formality? At the end of it all, I was there on the platform, little Ellie holding my hand, her brother strapped to my chest. You were all my prizes gathered together, huddled up in my arms. All my stars collided on a glorious galaxy of open spaces and blue skies. We left husband and children in the motel and wrapped the block to the expensive gastro pub, ordered Cosmos and cheeses, bites of steak and mussels. And I remember how beautiful we were then, so full of joy. And then I remember the way your breath sounded at the end, raspy baby breaths, how your skin turned the translucence of angels, otherworldly and somehow more deeply evolved. Later, we sat in the midday light next to your quiet body, your soul slowly making her way up and up and up, sliding beneath the closed hospital door and expanding, bursting through the terracotta roof of the building and shooting north over the San Gabriels, north and east and north again, flying over deserts and mountain ranges, over rivers and sunsets, flying to soften like clouds around us, soften and shift us into new spaces. This next one is called Scarf. It's been 2 months and still grief takes my breath away, makes me heave and catches me like a scarf on a nail, an unexpected tug around the neck, or better yet, being rear-ended while driving in summertime. The windows are rolled down like the old-fashioned kind, the kind you crank, and your favorite jam is loud on the radio and you're just kind of cruising, and bam, it's like that. But there is a longer space between heaving breaths now, less spaces that feel devoid of light, less I'm not really sure how I'll get dressed kind of days. And on the flip side, longer bursts of grace. Like grace is something I've never really known until now. Even still, I looked the word up in the dictionary and none of the definitions quite fit. Nothing is quite right, yet the word washes over me again and again, like yesterday, the pools laden with minerals, the way I feel them shift my being. It's almost enough to make you sick, almost suffocating, the way the water bubbles forth, sultry and sulfuric, ancient, anxious histories burst, the way I see a galaxy in my mind when they talk about the showering of strokes. The way I see a galaxy in my mind, the new sudden map we're forced to navigate, the yeses and nos, because sometimes there's nothing left but the cosmos, because sometimes there's nothing left but all of the little pulses and shifts we can't even see. All right. This one is part of this hospital series, thanks to my sister Allison for asking me to write in the hospital. Hospital 3, it's 3:27 p.m. Wednesday. She's been extubated since 1. We made decisions, ridiculous, hard decisions. We created space and ceremony. I counted seconds between breaths the way I used to count seconds between thunder rumbles for you. Oh my God, oh for you, you blew up my entire life. Those last lines arrived via phantom, I swear, or voice text. I prefer phantom. I prefer my opinionated mama inserting her thoughts oddly into my fingers as I type into this phone. And while I never choose the words blow up in a time like this, they kind of are perfect. We've been blown up with grief, blown up with unknowing, with love and grace and stillness and surprise. And now it's 5:28. She still gasps for air. One eye is slowly closing. Sister H still lies beside her. I'm the only one who hasn't. And at this moment, her eyes have a luminous, haunting white sheen. Her mouth, a dry emptiness, a stillness, as my mom will never laugh or speak or move ever so slowly again. Never put on her bright pink lipsticks, never slice an apple and pair it with a small square of Castello blue cheese, never open a box of her favorite biscuits, then transfer them into a glass jar because in a jar they look even more lovely. Never ask me big questions about big feelings, buy me a copy of a book she's just read so we can discuss it later, or leave me a random message or text or say, when will I see you again? She was always asking, when will I see you again? All right. I'm checking my time. I've got one more for you, my last minute. Thanks again so much for tuning in. This one's called Beneath the Bed. Sometimes you feel so far away until I wake with your hums in my mind and bits of bougainvillea fall from my sleepy eyes. I dare myself to play one of your voicemails while I wait for the water to boil. The best one is when you say you can't find me, that you looked under the bed but I wasn't there, and I see you bending your tiny frame, holding on just in case you topple, saying in your lovely voice, Jilly, are you here, Jilly? Is that you? And I wish I never ran away from that apartment of slow silhouettes and walker wheels. Wish I'd just crawled into bed with you each and every minute I was there, like I did when you died. And as the sun sets with a surety of spring, you beam through the lines of light, the supernatural pulsing of a murmuration of swallows, their choreography organized just the way you'd like. And I'm so glad that for a bit you're back, that you found me again. Thank you so much. I'm going to give it back to Mark.
All right. Thank you, Jillian. Those are beautiful poems. It's a hell of a tribute, the whole book. So thank you for sharing that. The next reader is the only one of these poets that is not quite into print yet. He's just about to go there. Clark Chatelain, I also met, like Jillian, in a workshop, in that same workshop years ago. And it was a wonderful workshop. There was all kinds of terrific poets that, you know, you never know who's out there. There's all, and that's the beauty of FootHills Publishing in a way too, I think, is that the sort of eclectic variety of all these people that you would never maybe hear or see anywhere else, but in this little small press that's off the charts. So anyway, I want to introduce Clark and let him read from this new manuscript that's about to be the next book in the series. We lost somebody in the series. Somebody had to withdraw their manuscript. And so Clark got bumped up and he's been scrambling to get his stuff ready and get it into print. We hope to see that book soon. It's titled Erosion. So I turn it now over to Clark Chatelain.
Thanks, Mark. And Mark says he's rushing me, but actually I think I sent him most of these poems 7 or 8 years ago at least. So it's a rush, but I've been relying on Mark for a long time. Thanks to Lauren and the Montana Book Festival for having me and for having all of us, and to all the other poets as well. It's been really good experience thus far. So I just have a couple of poems that I'm going to read today. Most of the poems in the collection are not titled. Some of them are, but most of them are not. And the two I'm reading today are not titled. The first one was inspired by an article I read by an anthropologist who argued that our ancestors survived so successfully by living in border areas. So places that were transitional spaces between forests, mountains, deserts, oceans, things like that. And I think you'll see the connection as we get through the poem. So here it is. This is the entirety of part 3 of my collection, Erosion. Near the expanse of the waters, separate now from the sky, and populated with fish nosed for the depths or finned for speed, ancient fish swimming the channels for food, reaping the shallower waters, the schools of the simpler and the small, and these others strangely bulbed and wide-eyed, built for pressure and cold. Near these waters, the expanse of these waters, where leviathans swim, some ape kneels at the shore at the break of dawn. Some ape with a wisdom dim in his eyes, and watches out over the sea, contemplating the distances. A mystic of the beginning, he trails his fingers in the cold, wet sand. What tribe is his? Which of the 12 who now waits for the sun, remembering what memory will bury that solar center? Privy to what inestimable depths of his own, hand pressed to a wall, to a face, to a stone. He will be a beast of his own making, coming strange to himself, in wonder at his own darkness, his own violence, his own light. This distance he considers with measured awe as a bird passes overhead, perhaps unnamed, perhaps known nonetheless. Along the shores and the edges of the woods they move, making the boundaries their homes, moving deftly in the between spaces, tracking the sun, the seasons, ordering their world by the world. Already though shaping this life by fire and stone, by the discovery of the sacred, and the world still not theirs. They move where the trees give way to savanna, where the stillness of the waiting is lurking in the undergrowth, where the eternity of the sea lies washed in moonlight. What of the word then, of the beginning, in the beginning, of the initial spark, a flame suspended in the nothing, accompanied by breath and the letters carved into the space of the nothing, giving it body and substance? What of the naming in the rib, of the procession of the animals, of the fall and the serpent, and the sorrow and the joy of the desert, of coming into their own? No, the word begins it all, and the name, what comes forth of the word, first in the darkness, a kind of black flame in the letters, and then the space opened there, opens completely, and the names pour forth. Or perhaps it is the cave, the shaman, hand pressed to the wall, reaching for the other side, to the beings there pressing back to her, becoming the bear, the lion, swaying in ecstasy. And still the birds cross the pale early skies, hunting, waiting for the moment, precise in every gesture, every movement, crossing our sky, near the expanse of the waters, carving the passing of time in the arc of a wing. On the surface, we still scan across the distances mirrored inside us. So this second poem, and the last one I'm going to read, is a little bit of a science fiction-y kind of poem, a little bit into the future, although after this summer, it doesn't feel quite so science fiction-y, which I think you'll see as we get through it. But this is another one that's untitled and comes near the end of the collection. The cliff swallows are swift. They fly up and down beyond the edge, almost in a dance. In the distance, the shallow river opens and spreads. There was a dam there once, but no more. At one time, deer would move through the shallows and out onto the plains in the hazy distance, and they may still, some days, but not today. Their numbers diminish, and this movement was not a migration anyway, but only a passage. The return of the river and its water after the dam removed brought the deer and the birds and other animals to the now lush fields. It was good. The water glistened from the top of the cliff, and one enjoyed seeing it as the swallows danced in the air below. Then the heat came, and the smoke from the fires. The heat was relentless and the flows slowed. On television once, there was a program about a river in Africa that came and went during the time of our distant ancestors. And the program told how these people shifted in both geography and population due to the variations in the temperature and the water and the foliage and the herds. Fields of grass and trees were lost to the desert, and the people moved on. Here too, one wonders if the people will move on. The swallows have not yet, nor the deer. But the foliage is diminished, the trees parched if not burned already. In the late summer, which goes on now for some time longer than in the past, the smoke curls into the lowlands and then lies just below the crown of the valley for weeks. Inversions keep it from dissipating, along with the continual renewal of smoke from the fires. It may be that some fires smolder even through the winter when there is yet still snow, and then flare up in the late spring months if no rain comes. It is uncertain. But the swallows still move, hunting for insects in the thin air, perching on the cliff face on thin, frail ledges to watch out over the fan of the river, as they have now for years and years. Their eyes blink with an impressive rapidity. They wait for a moment, and then they dive off the cliff. Their reasoning remains inscrutable. So thanks for listening to my poems, and I'll turn it back over to Mark. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Clark. We definitely look forward to that book. It's an interesting book. It's not a long manuscript, and it kind of all goes together. And I think you kind of get a sense of listening to just those two pieces that Clark read. So keep your eye out for Erosion, the next book in this series. So our last reader for today is Mara Ponich. And Mara is the owner of Fact and Fiction Books, as most of you probably know if you're local Missoulians. And this is Mara's first book. And, you know, it was kind of decided in Fact and Fiction, I think, that this series was actually going to go forward, because I was talking to both Mara and Chris at that time about Kurt's book and thinking, well, you know, this whole poetry series thing might be another good idea. So I suggested that to FootHills, and they said, yeah, let's do it. And I knew Mara had a manuscript. I had read some of the poems prior to this, so she was a natural for the second book in the collection. And it's a wonderful book that you're about to experience. So may I introduce Mara Ponich.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for being here and listening to us read. It is an honor to be part of the Montana Poets series and to be included with all these wonderful poets we've heard today. This is my book, Blood is Not the Water. And I'm just going to read a couple of poems from it. First one is titled The Literacy of You. The plow cuts whiteness down the curve of your fore, a fingernail scraping, dead cells snowing to the sheets to fade and mangle before laundering. Comfort comes in moments, a montage of joy speckled with constant questioning of what is morally and ethically right. Your arms and belly are the only legible thing as I struggle with the literacy of you. Reaching less understanding, the snow is a pretty surprise, a jolt of cleanness, smoothing slush and gray, comfort around a sore finger, warm with whiskey and honey. Make each word without expectation a sweet gift of breath. Let me read your story, recite the poem of your curled toes. The next one is titled Magician's Assistant. So I will sit with my legs in one space, abdomen and head in the next, wondering if I need a performance to reunite myself. This body has become memorabilia of a disappearance, the flutter of a dove pulled from my heart by a mediocre showman. This magician's assistant was sawed in half years ago, flayed in front of a live audience, and never quite returned to wholeness. I want to make you understand that I expect no comfort, no extraordinary measures made or taken to extend this mirage of daily life. And I'm going to read one more that's a longer poem. It is entitled Safe Space. 1. If you toss a woman from a moving car, a cigarette discarded with a violent flick of pointer finger and thumb, there are technicalities. 2. Consider adrenaline confuses as you jump off a bypass in the dark. The act of saving yourself is the very act through which you disappear. 3. I will tell you what you want to know, but refuse to identify solid. Water, ice, steam, rising from the coffee mug you despise, I secretly love. You unwrap me. I present unabashedly female, love the areas where you are curved and also where he is linear. 4. I am incognito in my nakedness, disappearing for lack of lipstick and colored breast. Birds, for want of a better metaphor, fluff their feathers at the sight of a favorable mate. Monsters, on the other hand, demonstrate in shady areas, interface between sacred and profane, our unconscious desire. 5. If you came to a holiday gathering, would you bring a gun? Does yearning inspire 2 shots, no warning? 6. What assumptions are made up from my low-slung dresses, your pants and boots? 7. I like the way you look. I like the way I look. I like the way I feel. I like the way they look at me, and I like the way they smile. I like the touch of your fingertips saying sexy things, and I like the way I turn my head when beauty passes by, and I like the falling snow in darkness, and I like my painted nails, and I like the praise from a stranger unaware, and I like to get emotional, excited, or dismayed, and I like the tender rolls of skin that fold beneath my clothes, and I like you knowing the place to touch, and I like to laugh and pull away, and I like to be with you, and I like to say I can't stay, and I like to be selfish, and I also aim to please, and I like to hold a warm cup, and I like to stay unafraid. 8. Thousands of minuscule needles perform a masochistic acupuncture treatment, reddening my chest and forearm, but they insist it is a sensitivity, not an allergy. 9. What would I have done to survive Western expansion, to outlast manifest destiny? A bedraggled prostitute, adorned, adored, cold and solid, with an excellent bedside manner, customer service guaranteed, hosiery and socks and sleeves and skirts and coverings and boots and woolens and corsets, too constricting to stay on for long. 10. I will be meat for your eating. Drag the steak knife against the grain. 11. She disappeared uncharacteristically. They are looking through garbage heaps for her name, her body, her DNA, her blood quantum, sifting the soup of our discarded lives for a clue, a single snowflake melted before accumulation. 12. At 17, he drowned in his own bathwater, and while everyone wailed, I imagined a sigh of relief as his muscles relaxed and gave way to warm waters. 13. Beware the bringing, the drawing of worms after a storm, dry drowning in the light of morning. 14. Fetish objects float through our unconscious memories. Unlaced boots efficiently, one-handed unbuttoning, bra straps, wool socks, combs and brushes, soft sweat and odor of bodies, naturally groomed, subtle imperfections. I want to make you into art, share my pleasure wantonly. 15. Does the way I present my breast, my curve, my soft mounds of fat and skin and muscle and foam make me less dominant, or does it give me more sense of control, subterfuge, a silent smile long before reaching for pepper spray? 16. She sits on her mystery. Worrying is an antiquated approach, exceptionally cleared because she knew him, she was aware of his person, not he, hers, object, objection, herself, memento mori, vanity of earthly life, more concerned with numbers than people, with numbers than people. 17. My closet is still full after the purge. Everything is coming out. 18. Breathe the steam of my nudity, the odor of the beast bear rising after lingering hibernation. 19. Stroke or household accident, lying on the bathroom floor 4 days, staring at the urine drips, the collection of hairs and dust and dirt below the rim. Should I retile with a contingency plan for staring 4 days alone and not dying? 20. A splotch of bright color in a gray alley, alone, icy, and curled in a doorway. 21. I built an altar in a lonely nook, filled it with the fates of women lost, stolen from newspapers and social media shares, torn from family albums. She's older now. She's 15. She knows him, trusts him. She's gone hard to frost under a snow-laden apple tree with anyone else but me, with anyone else but me, with anyone else but me. 22. This page is marked, your thumb where you touched my cheek, a smudge of flesh tone cream, a mask to cover dark spots and inflammations and selfhood. Wipe at me with your confusion. Undress me until I am honest before you. Eyebrow pencil, mascara, cover cream, lipstick, smear, nail polish, the hair in between. 23. You can't blame the bartender's hands for the additives included after he walks away. You can't blame the bar for what happens outside the bar. You can't blame him for trying to bed us both. You can't blame a stranger for being strange. You can't blame him for wanting. You can't blame him for looking. You can't blame him for trying. You can't blame him. You can't blame. You can't. You can. You. Thank you all. I'll send it back to Mark for questions and such.
I get unmuted here. Oh, thank you very much, Mara. That was wonderful. And you know, what a great demonstration, I guess, of the variety of wonderful poetry that we just witnessed here today. So, Lauren, I don't know as far as the Q&A thing goes. I'm not sure exactly what.
Well, it looks like we have one question in the Q&A, and we can certainly go to that. You know, we have about 6 minutes. So, Mark, if you want to answer this question, Craig is asking, well, there's a preface here. I wish to share my poems. It seems if I share them on Instagram or Facebook, many publishers will no longer accept them for anthologies, chapbooks, full collections, etc. I'd appreciate tips on this end of the business. So Mark, your in your experience as an editor and working with publishers, what can you say about keeping poems, exclusive to those published collections and not sharing on social media or elsewhere?
Well, I think it probably depends on exactly where you're publishing and who you're sharing with. It bottom line is, yes, I guess if you share the poem online before, then it's considered to be published. And if you have a particular journal or outfit that doesn't want anything that hasn't been seen before, then that's going to be an issue if you're going to be honest with them.
Yeah.
There's that aspect too, and I mean, it's up to each individual person, I think, to make your own decisions and choices about that. But it's just a matter of being, I think, upfront with the journal. So if you have something that you really want in a particular journal, then you probably shouldn't maybe, and the journal is not going to accept anything that's been published anywhere else before, then you probably shouldn't post it on Instagram or Facebook beforehand. Check with them and see, and after you've published it somewhere, then it's free game. How about game to publish it anywhere you want to publish it once it's been published? But yeah, that's kind of the way that works.
Yeah. There's another one from Kathleen. Hi, Kathleen. Do Mara and Chris read each other's works in progress? Mara, Chris, do you want to turn on your videos and jump in here and answer this? Maybe.
I would say we used to, but we don't anymore. Like, we wrote poetry every day together for a year, but we stopped that, I don't know, 6 months ago. So we saw like the rough drafts of each other's work for that year. Some I think are in her book, maybe a couple. None of mine in this book are from that process, but my next poetry manuscript is pretty much entirely made of poems from that process. But it's, like I said, we used to, but we don't anymore.
Pretty much answers it.
Mara, will you give us a look at the kind of the size of the painting behind you? Because that painting is by you, yes, and it also graces the cover of your book.
Yeah. Let's see. I don't know how to do this well, but it's very large.
It's big, yeah.
Almost, let's see. Here we go.
This is a question for Mark, maybe. Each of the covers of the FootHills titles in this series are, pretty vastly different. I'm wondering what process the covers go through, and do the authors have complete freedom over what goes on their cover?
Yeah, the publisher pretty much gives the author the opportunity to deal with the cover of the book. And so you have that option. I mean, that's one of the things that's nice, I think, about the publication, is that you do have a lot of creative control in the process of your own book. Mm-hmm. And so all these people have chosen the covers for their books and made the covers of their books. Well, Chris's book was made by a friend of his, and I know that the same thing with Jillian's book, that the photo on the cover of Kurt's book, as well as the photo that's coming out on the cover of Clark's book, were photographs taken by them or friends of theirs. And who am I leaving out?
I think you've covered it.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I had one that kind of got lost in the shuffle last year came out during the pandemic, and I had asked one of our local photographers here, Kurt Wilson, if he would wanted to play with me. Kurt was a photojournalist for years at the Missoulian, and so he gave me photographs to use for my book, and I was able to use more inside also. I know Chris's book also has images from the same artist. What's the artist's name, Chris?
Claire Carpenter she's Tiger Food Press in Portland, Oregon.
And is that mostly cloudy, Mark?
Yes.
What you're talking about?
Yeah, this little book.
Here, I'll put a link in the chat here.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you know what? We are at the 3 o'clock mark. So if there aren't any other questions, can we have all the poets turn their videos back on, and so we can see everyone together? Thank you. Yeah, perfect. A big thank you to all of you wonderful poets today. Congratulations on your new or forthcoming collections with FootHills Publishing. Thank you, Mark, for emceeing, moderating this, and thank you everyone who is in the audience today too. I want to thank again our event sponsors, Arts Missoula, Whitefish Review, and Burn Street Bistro. Just as a reminder, you can purchase books by these wonderful poets and many of our other Montana Book Festival authors at Fact and Fiction Books, Mara's baby. Be sure to enter the code MBF when you check out on their website, factandfictionbooks.com. And you can also vocally say the code if you want to go into the bookstore and browse the book festival titles. Just make sure that you're letting the bookseller know that you're using that code. I also urge you to purchase Montana Book Festival merchandise at montanabookfestival.com. There you can also donate so that we can continue programming virtual and one day, I hope, in-person events. So thank you again, everyone, for being here.
Thank you, Lauren.
Have a great afternoon, everybody.